Is life too short for the job you have? Is there no room to grow? And how do you even make the decision to leave?
It was hard to leave because it was my first CMO job, and I was like very involved with the VC community, and I kept thinking like, what will it say about me if I leave this job?
Yeah.
And, I can't hang, or I'm not good enough for, or so on. So that's just like ego. That's why it took me like 6 months to kind of get to a resolution. Because then I flipped it around and said, well, what does it say about me if I stay?
2024 is almost over, and maybe you're reflecting over your career. Well, you're not alone. We discussed career development with Robin Daniels, along with some classic lies such as titles don't matter.
I'm like, bullshit. Of course it matters. It matters to your own self-esteem. It matters to how you're viewed in the company. Yes. It matters to how you're viewed in the industry, what you can command when you go out and negotiate another deal or whatever it is. Right? So of course it matters. But to say that it's the number one thing, I also think that probably means that you have an overinflated system. Even when I was chasing the CMO title, it wasn't the number one thing.
Before we jump into the show, today's episode is brought to you by Everstage, the top-rated sales commissions platform on G2, Gartner Peer Insights, and Trustradius, with more than 2,000 reviews from customers like Diligent, Wiley, Trimble, and more. Visit everstage.com and mention Revenue Formula to unlock a personalized sales compensation strategy session with one of Everstage's RevOps experts. And now, enjoy the show.
I think this also serves him right. We had Carl Coleman on, and he was like, it's better with him not in the shot. And I was like, and I just sat down. I was like, I didn't get it. I didn't get what was happening. Do you get what's happening now, Tony?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Very good.
The thing is, so we have this journalist in Denmark called Steinmetz. He reports from the White House.
Yeah.
And there was a shot of him reporting live during summertime, and he's always like dressed up, suit, tie, shirt, the whole spiel, right?
We can see where
and
this is going.
basically you saw the shot of him, and then he had flip-flops and the shorts on underneath, which didn't make the cut. I'm wearing my hunter, like the pants I wear when I go hunting, and then
I'm
a
happy
shirt.
you
It's
wear
a very,
anything, Mikkel.
Yeah,
You know?
that wow.
You don't want to know what I'm wearing. As they like to say, professional up top, casual down below.
We gotta trust the AI with the decision making here right now. You know,
This show just got rated R.
I know. Seriously,
it's terrible.
Got very hot. There's a lot of people out there going, "Woo!" This is hot.
It's also truly great that you took us there, Robin, because we're going to talk a bit about career development, growth, because that's on people's mind today. So there's some do's and don'ts. We'll leave this one open for interpretation as to what should you do, what should.
Well, how do you think I got to where I am today? I'm just saying.
Oh man, and we were worried doing this offline and not in person was not going to work, but clearly works.
There are more jokes like this in the next hour. I can feel this right now.
Yeah. So we have Robin Daniels back with us on the show. Robin, thanks so much for joining us. You obviously talk a lot about leadership, career development. This is one of those things that are really close to your heart.
Yes.
We felt like this was the perfect time to get you back on the show. This episode is going to air, in that sweet spot between Christmas and New Year's Eve, where people might reflect a little bit over the year to come. Where are they going to go? How are they going to grow? What's going to happen for them professionally?
Sure.
Right? So really happy to have you with us here to kind of help us have that conversation. And I hope we've prepped you enough, because we kind of said, hey, you probably have some tips. You've talked with so many people. So like, what's the most important, the best advice right now? Can we start with like the best? I think would be.
Before we do that, do we actually agree that kind of the time between Christmas and New Year's is where everyone is kind of reflecting and thinking like, should I quit my job? Do we actually all believe that? Because I believe it actually. Is everyone else also thinking like this?
I actually don't know if that's true. I think it might happen more in the long summer vacations when you're really out there.
Yes.
On the beach, in the mountains, the weather's nice. You're like, fuck, do I really want to go back to work? Right? Because here at the winter, it's like a lot of time with family, and that can be too much for some people. Like, I can't wait to get back to work. After spending all this time, concentrated with this many people. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I buy your thesis completely.
No, I mean, this is an excellent point. I mean, when we shut down Growblocks, a lot of people were like, "Oh, why did you do it?" And then we talked about the RevOps thing, But really, it was just I just came back from the summer break and I was like, I'm done with this now. This is over.
Exactly.
I don't want to keep doing this anymore.
But okay, so maybe summer's number one, maybe winter's number two. But it's just like families are dicey. I love like family, like my family, but also getting too much of them sometimes. It's like okay, whew, that's why work is a nice reprieve from that. But yeah, I think it is probably true, honestly, that a lot of people do reflect. I mean, I think I've done that when I think back on my life and career. But just to start us off, I mean, when I first moved to California in 2000, as I think, it's well documented. We've talked about it when I was in the last podcast about that one-way ticket from Copenhagen to California. And the first kind of year was a bust, job failure, and so on. And then in the second year in 2001, I got a job at a big company called Veritas, and they were doing quite well. So even in that dark time when everybody was kind of laying off or going bankrupt and nobody's getting funding and so on, I got a job at this company, and they were growing like 25% year over year, so quite good at that time. And it was a little bit bigger company, a couple of thousand people, and I ended up I ended up being in marketing, a product marketing manager, and I ended up working for the CMO or in that team, of course. And I ended up marrying the executive assistant to the CMO, because even back then I was very motivated, like I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get to the top, and it's worked well so far. It worked, and I'm gonna continue with that. So my tip to anybody who's listening is like, go figure out how to do that in your life, and you'll make it. No, I'm kidding, but actually, I think about my life, and a lot of it's come down to, I would say there's a couple of things to reflect on, honestly. When I was that early, I think it changes depending on the stage in life you're at. At that stage, when I was 21, right, and I moved to the US, and I really didn't have much skills or experience or anything like that. The two things that were completely in my control that I think if you're just starting out your career, that you should absolutely lean into in the new year, the energy you show up with and the initiative that you take. So what does that mean? I think these are two things that you can, a lot of things you can't control. You can't always control the jobs you get assigned, tasks that you work on, and so on, because you're probably at the kind of starting point of the career ladder, right? So you're working for somebody who's working for somebody, and so on. But you can't control those two things. And what do I mean? So energy is like the way you show up every day. Is it a net positive for everybody around you? Are you showing up with energy, passion, conviction, excitement, enthusiasm? That goes a long way. And it's doing that consistently, in a way that lifts people up around you. I mean, people always end up noticing those people, want to work with those people. And it might sound like I'm biasing towards maybe extroverts, but I don't think it has anything to do with that. I've seen many introverts who can be just as positive, and in a very different way, of course, but it doesn't change the fact that the way you show up every day really gets noticed, right? And then it starts compounding over time if you do that consistently, day after day, week after week, month after month, and so on. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And then the second thing is initiative. And what does that mean? It means finding the things that your boss maybe doesn't have time to work on or haven't even thought of, and figuring out great solutions to solving those issues in a way that's, again, net positive for both the person you work for, maybe also the team, or maybe even the company. Finding these things that will set you apart from kind of everybody else and put you on a path. I mean, these two alone are not enough for a promotion, but they'll certainly set you apart. And I always kind of advise people who are just starting out. I just actually started mentoring somebody in the US. We had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. And I gave her this advice. I said, these are two things. She's about to graduate, and she had questions. I'm part of this mentorship program. Like, these two things you can't control. It doesn't mean it's easy, because finding like things to take initiative on, but there's always things. Sometimes they're tiny things, like just shit that nobody wants to focus on because they're just like mundane, and nobody's like, just put it in a corner somewhere. But sometimes they're big kind of existential things, right? And if you can find kind of a mix of those things, it'll really, really set you apart.
I think it's also like if you're the person who brings that energy and that positive attitude to the office every day, people are going to start seeking you out. They will want to work with you, right? Because they know, okay, this is going to be easy. Even if it fails, at least we'll probably have fun, right? So I think that's a really good insight. And at least me personally, one of the things I worked with was this approach of saying, well, I'm going to start, if I'm starting a new job, I'm going to start it as I mean to go on. Yeah. So, not just saying, well, eventually I'll push the pedal to the metal, right? But you got to bring those, those elements from day one, basically, right? Yeah, so totally. I know, Tony, you all probably also wanted to jump in.
What I like about that part of the advice, it's fully in your control. You know, it could be
Yeah.
it could be that, I don't know, there's a skill gap or some experience thing that you haven't figured out, and it's
course.
difficult for you to just catch up on that. But the way you show up and kind of the initiative you show is like, it's completely in your control. And there's also for yourself, there's not really much room for like an excuse, like, you know, I couldn't show up with energy. Like, of course you could, of course you
Of course
could,
you can.
right?
It's a great way. You're absolutely right. It's the two things you can 100% control. It's simple. It doesn't mean it's easy. If it was easy, kind of everyone would
that's
do it,
right.
of course. So we know that. So it's simple, not necessarily easy, but it also holds yourself accountable because you can control those things 100%, right? Do you show up in a way like where there's like you go above and beyond and you work your ass off, right? Like when I was just starting out my career, I'm sure it's probably you too that you've had great stuff happen in your lives and careers too. All you have is that, right? You don't really have anything else besides those two things. And then and then I'm lucky enough that along the way, because I showed up with those two things, people started seeing things in me and started taking chances on me and believing, giving me more responsibility, cool projects. Maybe you should become a leader, blah, 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 all these things, right? But it's only because I really had those two things. Of course, that's changed over time as, you know, I've gotten more senior and a leader of people and so on.
No, but I think it's also as you know, when you then become a leader and then you have those people working for you and you see the difference between those two, it's also, well, you know, where do you gravitate towards, right? Where do you as a leader kind of want to spend more time with, you know, with whom, and so forth, right? And there's just also very human aspect to it, I think, which is actually also catering to the people around you that can give you those opportunities, right? And I sometimes feel like, especially people kind of early in their careers, they feel it's all about the skill and the hard skills, and, you know, maybe there's a soft skill, but it's also about the human element of people wanting to spend time with you. Like, you know, it's, hey, you know, maybe there's a trip that your boss needs to go on, right? And then the boss like, I kind of don't want to go alone. You know, whom should I take? Right? I mean, we all had those things happening to us, right?
Totally.
And it's a good thing when then he or she brings you, right? I mean, you spend you know, more quality time. You kind of get to know each other a bit better. And this will not come from you being the most excellent in this one specific area, right? There's really a human aspect to it as well.
I always think of this way. It's simple. I have this kind of saying, catchphrase, I don't know what you call it, but the soft skills, the hard skills will get you in the door, but it's the soft skills that will get you ahead. Right?
Yeah.
That's mostly true because a lot of times it's like based on your resume and kind of how you show up. So that's of course a mix of hard skills and soft skills, but the hard skills will mostly get you to, like, people scan a resume and look at that, and then but it's the soft skills that will get you ahead. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. So if you think about this whole idea of career and looking forward and all that stuff, there's a couple of tips I would give to people. Number one is have clarity on what it is that you want to, what matters to you. You know, that I've done that a lot of times in my life where I list out all the things that I can kind of evaluate opportunities on. And there's probably like honestly 15 to 20 things: mission, purpose, company size, title, pay, commute, boss. There's a whole list. I have this whole list of things, right? But you have, as part of that, you have to decide what matters more. When I was early in my career, for example, I set myself the goal that I wanted to be a head of marketing by the time I was 35. You know, I led some smaller teams. You know, with Box, I was the head of enterprise marketing, but I didn't lead all of marketing. Right, I was working for the head of marketing there, so I wanted that, and I ended up. So I was very ambitious at that point. And now, you know, of course, I'm a little older and so on. So that whole idea of title and so on honestly doesn't matter to me. But I also hate when people say, "Oh, title doesn't matter." Yeah, okay, maybe it's not the most important thing, but it matters, and it matters certain points in your life and career and so on, right? But you have to have clarity on like what matters to you most. And sometimes it's pay, sometimes it's the commute, sometimes it's the team. You just want to be part of a team that's kicking ass where you can learn from lots of different things. But I think it starts with that.
So I think maybe just jump in here
Yeah,
because
go
there's
for
an
it.
interesting question for us to maybe dive into on specifically titles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's some that might have had a certain level and then do this exercise of figuring out, well, I really want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is more important to me. But then all of a sudden the title is not necessarily the same.
Yes.
How do you navigate that conversation, right? I think
Yeah.
that is also an interesting one for us to tackle.
I deal with this all the time. It's super tough because at some point you have to, again, evaluate what you value and also set your ego aside a little bit, right? And that's, of course, a tough thing for most of us. For example, so after I left Box, I was the head of enterprise marketing. And then I went to a tiny company. We were like 8 people at the time, and I was the CMO. That was kind of the first business hire. We ended up getting funding. We grew it to over 100 people and over 10 million in ARR, got acquired and so on. But then I went from there to LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, I was the head of product marketing. So it's much smaller But I was leading product marketing for like a $4 billion product line, I had a team of 50. So my team was bigger, the revenue was way bigger, but my title was smaller. So it's like one of those things you have to evaluate. So it's really hard to compare apples to apples, like unless you go, of course, from like, am I going to be the CMO at Google or the CMO at Apple? Okay, maybe then you can compare, right? But for most of us, that's not the case, right? It's like, so you have to evaluate it in a kind of a sober light. You have to have an honest conversation with yourself about where you really are. Could I have been CMO at LinkedIn at that time? I mean, I didn't have the experience at that scale, right? But the company at that point was probably $7 billion in revenue. The team was 800 people or something. It's like, so probably not. And then I became afterwards, CMO. So after doing that, then I became CMO at WeWork again. And so your career journey is kind of like a series of journeys. For me, at that point, it was more important about the learning and the mission. Then because I started changing from being ambitious around the title to much more ambitious around the mission, the people, the impact I can have, and so on.
But also
I just think
to
it's
be
important to take some of those feelings out of the equation. I mean, I've done this myself. In the latest job I had, this was not a lateral move, but it was very intentional. And I've been super happy with that decision I took as an individual. And it's definitely fueled me a lot versus what the alternatives were. So sorry, Tony.
No, I do think though that there's a bit of a difference between having gotten the C-level title at some point, because I think a lot of people want to get to this, right? So there's, I don't know you that well, Robin, but I feel like if you have never gotten the C-level title, you probably would have like, that's still on my checklist, right? I still want to get the CMO thing.
For sure.
I think, and once you get it, kind of once you're CRO, CMO, CEO, whatever, I think then people relax around this whole thing. And then they're like, hey, you know what, title's not that super important, and they totally get it. But everyone around you is like, no, it's really important to me, right? So I think there's also a little bit of a perspective there to balance this out sometimes.
Well, that's why I said, I hate when people say, I've heard this a few times when I've like been chasing that. Oh, don't worry, titles doesn't matter. It matters what you do and the impact. I'm like, bullshit. Of course it matters. It matters to your own self-esteem. It matters to how you're viewed in the company. It matters to how you're viewed in the industry, what you can command when you go out and negotiate another deal or whatever it is. Right? So of course it matters. But to say that it's the number one thing, I also think that probably means that you have an overinflated sense. Even when I was chasing the CMO title, it wasn't the number one thing. It wasn't even probably the top three thing, but it was important, right? It was like I wanted to get there at some point. And the reason I wanted to get there was tied to the other things on that list, because I always felt that I could see fairly when I started getting management responsibilities and started leading people that I was pretty good at it. And I'm like, and I wanted to have as much impact. And of course, the more C-level you get, the bigger in the company and role, you can impact more people. To me, it's like, can I impact as many people and lift them up around me? And the more senior you are, you can do that at a higher scale, right? Okay, so that was the first thing.
That was the first thing, yeah.
Okay, so the second thing is, as we go into the holidays, and maybe you're coming out of the holidays, I think the other thing is, at the end of each week, I always kind of measure myself on a scale of 1 to 10. My happiness, my satisfaction. And it's very rare to get a 10, so let's just get that out of the way. I think if you can consistently be in this place of like 7 to 9, I think you're in a fairly good spot. It means that you'll have a lot of highs, maybe a few lows in the week, but a lot of highs, and you're making a difference. If you're like in the 4 to 6 range, I think it's worth monitoring. It's not sustainable to stay in that range very long, but we all have them. I've had some weeks, when I've had to let people go, or some projects didn't work, or whatever it is. Like customers pissed off, kind of like shitty weeks and so on. As long as you can pull yourself out and you come back on a higher trade, I think that's fine. And if you're in a kind of 1 to 3 range, I think every now and then, if something, of course, terrible happens in your life and so on, that happens, but if you're there consistently, week over week, get the fuck out. Honestly, like life is too short. I always say that to people. Life is too short to be in a job that's completely miserable. And I get sometimes you have to just do it because you need to get paid and support your family and so on, right? For those of us who have the luxury, maybe we can choose a little bit more. I get it, but if you have the choice, get out. Life is way too short to be in a job that just destroys your soul every single day, right? But so, because if the Friday night test is actually really powerful, it's very simple. Just kind of, it's like you don't say it out loud. You just kind of calibrate in your head, look yourself in the mirror. And I'm like, when I think about the last week, did I feel like I made a difference? Did I have fun doing it? Was I laughing? Like barometer I use oftentimes, like, am I laughing a little bit every day with the team that I'm working with? Small things that they add up to something. And I would say I'm consistently in between 7 and 9. but it's just like an easy thing to do. And it guides you towards your future roadmap. If you're getting stuck in that 4 to 6 range, that's a hard one because it's not horrible, but it's not great either. And I just like, I'm very much of the philosophy, life is short. Go do something you love, right? You know, you're not doing anybody any favors in your job as a result. The world is not much better off. Your family, even though you think, oh, it's not affecting my home life. And so, of course, if you come home, you're not excited by your work, which takes up so much of your life. I can guarantee it's probably going to affect your relationship with your kids, or your partner, or whatever it is.
So what would be your advice to folks that don't consistently land into the 7 to 9 range? Is it just pack your things and leave, or is it, should you bring it up with your boss? Kind of how should you deal with, or is it just an internal thing for you that you need to work on?
Well, so it's definitely don't just up and leave. I think that's traditionally a bad strategy. Again, unless it's like hurting your soul. If you're like 1 or 2, just like get the fuck out, right? But no, you should definitely not just up and leave. But you should do some introspection, some self-reflection about why, and figure out why it is. Is it because I'm in a toxic environment? Am I not inspired by the work I'm doing? Am I not learning anything new? Do I not believe in the mission of the company? It could be so many things. It's hard to like pinpoint, right? It requires you to have a little bit of like, so I'll give you an example. When I left Box, I went to Vera, the cybersecurity company, where I became the CMO for the first time. And I was there for like 2.5 years, and so on. I really liked the team. I liked the work I was doing, but the last 6 months, I kept waking up. I was just not excited by the mission we're on. I'm like, I didn't love cybersecurity. God bless the people who do it because we need it, but it was just not for me. I would go to these conferences and they were just so negative and about doom and gloom, about cyber warfare and hacking. And I'm just like, you know me, like I'm very positive and optimistic. I'm just like, it just was not feel like my crowd. And I was like, I have a very hard time faking it if I'm not really excited by it. I need to be excited by the mission I'm on, like and so on. So for that one specifically, it was about I didn't believe in the mission. There's been other times where I've left because the environment was toxic and it was like not healthy and so on. But that one specifically was just about it. So I guess my point is you need to have like an honest self-reflection about what it is. Right? Sometimes it's very obvious. And it became obvious over time because kept waking up with this feeling like I'm just not excited to go to work. And as I started doing some deep reflection and self-work, I'm like, I like the team, I kind of like my job. I like that I run all of marketing and I get to kind of call the shots there and so on. But I just wasn't excited by it. I'm like, why am I feeling so low on energy all the time? And my wife could tell, of course, as well, right? But it was hard because it was hard to leave because it was my first CMO job. And I was like very involved with the VC community. And I kept thinking like, what will it say about me if I leave this job?
Yeah.
And, I can't hang or I'm not good enough for it or so on. So that's just like ego. That's why it took me like 6 months to kind of get to a resolution because then I flipped it around and said, well, what does it say about me if I stay? That I'm in a job that I don't love and I'm not doing the best work of my life. And maybe they feel it too, but nobody would ever say it, right? And so I'm not really doing anybody any favors. I'm not doing myself any favors or anybody else by doing something I don't love. That's how I feel about it. So that kind of it's really about doing those deep talks with yourself and figuring it out.
Do you, and maybe this is my last follow-up question on this, but do you think if someone is having kind of those thoughts, but basically arrives at the end that, oh, I'm not getting paid enough, do you think this is a BS reason, or do you think it's a real reason that might actually change your happiness level once you maybe get paid more?
Well, honestly, I think this is. I don't want to sound like it's harsh, but I don't think many people think they're paid enough usually. So it always comes up in most conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's true, but I think a lot of times it has to be taken in the context of so many other things, right? If you're like overworked and underpaid, yeah, that's not sustainable. I think that's not fair probably in many ways. But I also think, if there's like two things I always know comes up in any like employee survey, anybody else, whether that was WeWork or LinkedIn or Salesforce, like people feel like they're overworked and underpaid. That's usually like the two things. It's like, yeah, but compared to like if you're working Starbucks or you're working on, like, you're probably making way more money. So everything is kind of relative, but yeah. It's a hard one to say. There probably are cases. So I don't want to like dismiss it completely, It depends on, but then if you really truly feel like you're underpaid, and again, that's what's hurting you. Like when you're doing that weekly check-in and your self-reflection, then maybe you should leave. Yeah, if that's something where you can, if it's a way where you can sustain yourself, maybe it's more your ego. But if it's a way where you can actually support your family and your lifestyle, then maybe go somewhere else.
Honestly, also when I've had that conversation with folks, I also flipped it around and said, well, you kind of took the offer to join here at a certain level. Why?
Yes,
Why
yes.
was it not an issue when we spoke then, right?
yes,
and I
yes.
think that just changes the dynamic quite often. Speaking of salary, by the way,
Yeah.
there's going to be probably a few new jobs appearing when we're on the other side of New Year's Eve, right? New budgets unlocked. And then on the other hand, SaaS is notorious, at least startups, are notorious for having low tenure.
Yes.
How should people think about, should I stay or should I go? When do we know it's actually time? I mean, we've kind of talked a bit about some of it, but maybe there are some folks out there who are generally happy at work, but it's also a good offer. And then it's really difficult.
Yeah,
do you know what I
it is.
mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
when do you know when it's time to move?
Well, it starts even before. Again, if we're honest about it, the fact that you're even taking a meeting with someone probably says there's something you're not quite happy with, right? So let's be honest about that. But let's say you get as far as you get an offer, right? And if the offer is like killer, I mean, any good manager would say to their employee, "You'd be stupid not to take it," right? It's like we're all humans and we all want the best for each other. Yes, there are some assholes out there, but in general, I would say, if you want the best for your people, I hope all my people that work for me become mega successful. And I know sometime they will leave, right? At LinkedIn, we had this concept of next play. And I loved it. It was always that when people left, however long they were with us, we would celebrate them. We would never try to shame them or anything like that, which happens sometimes, right? But it was always celebrate them because they're moving on to something that they're maybe more happy about, that's paying them better, maybe it's a bigger job, whatever it is. And so if somebody comes to me and you can see, okay, the offer's so good, I'll be like, you'd be stupid not to take it. If somebody's getting 50% more, which happens sometimes, they're like, go take it. You'd be silly not to, because I can't match that, right? Of course. But if somebody comes and says, hey, I'm getting a matching offer at a different job, then it's probably because they're unhappy maybe with how I'm leading them or that their role in the team or something. So it really depends, right, on that stuff.
I think this topic is super interesting. From a manager perspective, if someone comes with an offer, matching or 50% above or whatever, what's actually your general opinion, or do you have a rule of thumb, when should you try and retain that employee, right? Because sometimes this comes, and we're calling this in Denmark. Denmark is very egalitarian, right? Very fair, everything. And the person was paid fairly already compared to the peers and so forth. And now there's a different offer on the table. Paying that person more might kind of kick off a whole chain reaction of whom else you need to now pay more, right?
Yeah.
But what's your view on that? Actually, kind of how should a manager, if it's worth it, should they engage and try and kind of save that employee, or is it like, you know what, this is gonna cause more pain anyway, so let's just leave it go?
I'll be honest, it happens to me a lot because I'm in an industry that's fast moving, right? And there's always new hot startups and so on. It's happened to me at Sensei. It's happened to me at many other companies as well. And I've kind of changed my philosophy a little bit over the years. I would say that the way I think of it now is I'm on your side. I'm human first. If this is really what you want to do, I'll support you all the way. That's usually kind of what I say. But then I, of course, try to dig deeper into understand why it is, right? And if it's because, for example, I had one, I won't say where it was, but who just felt like I wasn't paying enough attention and giving them enough mentoring. I was like, that's something I can fix, right? And so on. It depends on if what they're seeking and kind of what it is that they feel like they need, they're not getting. But again, if it's just pure pay and they're happy here, but the pay is higher, then I'm like, just go for it, right? Again, depends on if it's if being offered a role in a rocket ship where your equity is going to be worth off, maybe if you get equity, right, and pay and so on. I've tried, but I've also many times saved people, honestly, from leaving. But it comes down to then having that more deep conversation because they can see that I care. A lot of people just want to know that you care. A lot of people don't feel seen enough or heard enough or invested enough. Again, that number I'm obsessed with, that 70% of people want to quit their jobs. And it's just kind of mind-blowing. It's kind of what keeps me up at night because I want to change that in the world. But if you dig deep into why that is, it's because most people feel like they're stuck. Nobody cares for them. Nobody's investing. They're not learning new skills that's going to help them in the future. So if I, as a manager, can give them that nudge or push them in that direction and teach them those right things, if I can do that, great. And if I'm not the right person, then maybe they go somewhere else. But I never try to shame anybody to stay. I think it's just it's a lose. The world is small and karma is real. So try to do what's best for the person.
So what about moving upwards in the
Yeah.
organization? This is also something that kept returning to me when I was a leader. Folks kind of wanted to get to the, let's say, the next stage
Yes.
of their career. And this is also something a lot of folks will definitely reflect over, New Year's resolutions wise. How do you think about that dimension, basically?
This is the perfect, the question I've gotten the most by far, right? And I've had it myself to leaders, but it's by far the question I get the most. How do I get to the next level? How do I get promoted? And so I have a formula now, and I've used that for a couple of years. And the formula is this. There's 3 things you have to do. And it's not one of them. It's not 2 of them. You have to do all 3. Number 1 is you have to consistently crush your goals. Not just a quarter, because everyone can have a good quarter, and then the next quarter is maybe shit. But you have to consistently crush your goals, quarter after quarter after quarter. But what does that mean? How do you get there? It's very simple. You have to have clarity around what your goals are. It's very hard to achieve the things that you want to achieve if you don't know what you're chasing in the first place. So have a conversation with your manager, like, how am I being measured? What do you want me to achieve? Because then you can either achieve it or hopefully overachieve it, right? Crush those goals. So that's number 1. And because nobody gets rewarded after just a quarter. And I see sometimes very young people going, hey, I had a great quarter, I should get promoted. I'm like, that's not quite how it works, right? You got to show that excellence quarter after quarter. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that you have to start acting as if you're at the next level. So you've been a manager, I'm sure, Mikkel, and if you wanted to become a director, and then from director to a vice president or something, start acting as if you're already at that level, and meaning that you're taking on more responsibility, you're modeling your behaviors. Maybe you get involved in more projects, you are taking more initiatives, you're coaching across departmental lines, you're helping across departmental lines. Like, what does a VP do that a director's not doing, maybe, or a manager's not doing? You can start seeing that. The thing it requires, though, so just like the first one requires clarity, the second one requires that you have role models that you can model yourself after. Hopefully you have that at work, but if not, maybe you find someone in your life where you can see, wow, this person has gotten to the next level. Let me learn from him, reach out to him, see if they can be a mentor. That's how I end up mentoring quite a few people. People reach out to me on LinkedIn. They'll say, hey, you had a great career. I'd love to get to the next level. I don't take on a lot of them because I don't have that much time, but I have a few because of their story and where I can see I can kind of lean in. But you have to have role models. So start acting as if you're at the next level without even the title. That's really a great sign of somebody who's ready to get promoted. And that's what we all notice as leaders, like, wow, that person's kind of stepping up. And then the third thing, which is maybe the hardest thing that people forget a lot, which is the soft skills. And I say you have to have a chorus of support. You have to have a group of support around you. Like, oh, Mikkel, the way he shows up every day is such a great net positive. His energy and conviction and passion. The team loves working with him. He's helpful, he's joyful, he collaborates well, he communicates well, and so on, right? Tony, on the other hand, I don't know, he's really good at what he does, but
nailed it.
but the way he shows up, he's like a little difficult and so on. So I can always tell like what people think about. And so my point is, it's not one thing. And people often mistake that. They're like, hey, I crushed my goals. I'm like, yeah, but I hear lots of things about you being difficult to work with. I'm like, do you think that's success? Or, yeah, you're crushing your goals, but you're not really going beyond what's defined of you. Because that's the thing. So it's really doing all of those 3 things, right? And so what does that require then at the end of the day is that level of self-reflection and removing your ego a little bit from it and say, like, how am I actually doing on those 3 things? If you're really, truly honest with yourself, if you have to give yourself, let's say, a 1 to 10 ranking on each of those 3 dimensions, the way you're crushing your goals, the way that you're acting as if you're at the next level, and the way that you're showing up for everybody else, the thing we talked about at the beginning, passion, energy, initiative, and so on. How would you rank yourself on all those? And but being honest about it allows you to course correct and say, okay, I can go fix this in the next 6 months or whatever it is. Yeah.
So the way
sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to call you out. I know you're a delight to work with.
No.
It's accurate.
I think you were actually on
We'll
point. I didn't take any offense because you were on point. No, but my thinking was actually, so when I had those conversations, I sometimes kind of said, hey, make it easy for me to promote you, right? Because it's almost, because the 3 things you're saying there is like, if you go into, have a conversation, maybe get a manager to a director, what's going to happen is you need to, also as a VP, as a C-level, you need to coordinate with your peers. Like, is this okay that I'm doing this, right? And then they're going to be like, well, I think he missed last quarter, and like, he's kind of a dick, and you don't want to have that pushback, right? And it's I think you kind of put it really in the formula really nicely and make it also from the person's perspective, which, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing, right? Kind of, hey, make it easy for me to promote you. And those are the three things that just need to be there.
I mean, I don't know how it's been for you two, but all my promotion decisions are never just me. We usually sit a group of people talking about, let's talk about Susan versus Joe. Oh, Susan's great and blah, blah, blah. Here's all the stuff she achieved and so on. And then, oh, Joe, I can always tell which way the wind is blowing, but it's never just, I'm not a dictator. I can't just make that call because it's usually a group decision, right? People who are sitting there. I'm sure it's the same for you. So that's why that last one is so hard. People often get kind of pissed off. I've seen that quite happen a few times when it's like, but I did all the work. I did everything you asked of me. I'm like, yeah, that's only part of the work. If you think that's the only part of the job, you're mistaken. The other part of the job is the way you show up for people every single day.
I think also to maybe just throw a curveball at the two of you, sometimes as a leader in this scenario, you also just don't have room.
Yeah.
You don't have room for that next, I don't know, head off or whatever.
That's true.
And I think this is also important for us to talk about for those folks who are eyeing that's the next step they want to take. How should they think about this going into the new year?
That's actually a really good one. That's one of the more difficult cases to deal with when people really feel like they're ready and you can kind of see that they are, but you don't have the room in your team. Then it becomes an honest conversation with that person around, is there more for you to learn here and more for you to achieve? Can we move you maybe to take on some other stuff within the company that can maybe get you there? Because this role that you have right now, there's just not scope for you to be a VP. You're let's say you're director of PR. We're too small to have a VP of PR. So what else can you take on? Maybe you become VP of brand and PR, right? Maybe it's a bigger role, right? What else can you take on that can get you there? But this role is too small. And if they don't want that, or they feel like they're so done with it or specialized, then maybe it's time for them to move on. That's what I coach people, because I'm like, I can't, then you'll just end up being miserable, because if that's what you're chasing, right? But it becomes a lot of like, what can we get you? What can we give you? If they're a superstar, right? I always think of it this way. I have this philosophy. I tell this to my team because I worked in companies that are going through a lot of change. I mean, Sensei's going through a lot of change. A lot of my companies have gone through these hyper changes and transformations. And I say this, my job as a leader is to fight for you relentlessly. What I mean is that if you show up every day with that passion, energy, and conviction, and you do a good job, I will do whatever I can to ensure that you enjoy what you do and that you're successful. I give you the knowledge and the resource to be successful every single day. And I will fight for you relentlessly for that. That's my job and responsibility, my commitment to you as a leader. What I can't promise you and what I can't commit to is that your job will always stay the same, your role will always stay the same, the team will always stay the same, because we're a company in change. Because I can tell so oftentimes people get frustrated when I get moved to this team, or suddenly I get a new boss and so on. It happens a lot, but I'm like, I can't promise you that, because we're not in a static environment. Our environment's going to change a lot. The way the company is today versus how it's going to be a year from now, it's probably going to be wildly different. And so if you're open to the change and growth and possibility that comes with that, this is a perfect place for you. Because those are the kind of companies I choose, right? But if you don't like that and it creates you a lot of heartache and uncertainty and frustration, then maybe this is not the right place for you, because I can't promise you that will happen. But I will promise you that we'll fight for you relentlessly if you do a good job and you show up in a way that's positive for everybody else.
Oh, I think we covered a lot of ground in as usual, actually, and also had a fun conversation. I at least hope that this is gonna help a lot of folks figure out what is the next step, what is the right decision for them. Thanks so much for sharing a couple of tools with our listeners, Robin, and joining us on the Revenue Formula.
Thanks, guys. I love chatting with you.
Have a good one, and everyone else, hit subscribe and so forth. Thanks a bunch for listening. Bye-bye.
Peace.